Here's the truth. Ads don't build brands anymore. Culture does. If you and I had $1 billion tomorrow and we said, hey, let's launch a vodka brand, we still wouldn't come close to the cultural pull The Rock has with his tequila. And that's because money isn't the advantage anymore. Distribution isn't even the advantage anymore. The only real advantage left is culture. In this video, I want to talk you through why culture is the most powerful force in branding right now, and how nostalgia, sport, art, and even surprise moments all connect to that same core idea. Because when you see the pattern, you realize this: culture isn't one strategy among many. It's the foundation everything else sits on. But before I do that, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you like this episode and my work, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. You can also follow me on your favorite social media platform where I share how I'm building IP as a founder every step of the way. All right, let's dive in. You can see it everywhere. The brands that break through don't do it because they outspend everyone. They do it because they tapped into conversations people were already having. Barbie is the obvious one. That film didn't just premiere in cinemas, it premiered in culture. You couldn't open TikTok without seeing everyone in pink. Fashion houses rushed capsule collections, even food brands turned their packaging in pink. But Mattel didn't buy that reach. They plugged into culture in a way that made Barbie unavoidable. And this isn't just blockbuster budgets. Look at Skims. And yes, Kim Kardashian's celebrity mattered, but the brilliance was cultural timing. They launched when shapewear was still seen as this secret underlayer. They reframed it as both functional and cultural, and suddenly it wasn't shamewear, it was powerwear. Skims plugged into conversations about body confidence, inclusivity, and comfort. Things bigger than the product itself. So if your brand isn't in the group chat, it doesn't exist. What do I mean by that? This is how culture works right now. People don't just consume brands, they talk about them in their spare time and they perform them. The Stanley Cup craze, do you remember that? That wasn't advertising. That was people showing identity through a water bottle. Culture doesn't need permission. And the truth is, if you're not part of it, you're not part of the conversation. And here is where it gets really interesting. Culture isn't always about what's new. In fact, in this moment, it's often about what feels old rather than new. Everywhere you look, nostalgia is winning these days. Gen Z, the generation supposedly obsessed with disruption, is actually streaming Friends. Country music is topping the charts. Even Olive Garden is making a comeback. And why? Because the future feels unstable. AI, climate change, politics, the economy, it's a lot. And people crave comfort. And brands that lean into that are thriving. Abercrombie & Fitch was that in the water 3 years ago. And now it's back because it leaned into what people remembered, the brand DNA, but with a more modern attitude and a little bit more inclusive. Lego has done exactly the same. By leaning into retro sets for adults, they reconnected with people who hadn't touched Lego since childhood. But let's flip this. Nostalgia can also backfire. Do you remember Victoria's Secret? For years, they leaned into a fantasy version of femininity that once worked. Nostalgia told them it was powerful, but culture had moved on. And when they failed to read that shift, they completely collapsed. Kodak is another one. They owned nostalgia, the yellow box, the film rolls, the Kodak moments, but they clung to it too tightly. Nostalgia blinded them to digital photography, and by the time they pivoted, it was way too late. So, look, nostalgia isn't a strategy, it's all about context. And the point is this: nostalgia works when it feels like comfort. It fails when it feels like denial of reality. So, how do you know the difference? Well, it's pretty simple. Ask yourself, is this nostalgia connecting to people's current needs, or is it just you clinging to your own story? Now, this brings me to the one arena where nostalgia and futurism collide perfectly. And that is sport. Now listen, I spent years working at Puma, and I can tell you firsthand, sport is one of the last things that unites people. In a world of fractured feeds and polarized news cycles, the World Cup or the Olympics still brings billions together. Those are rare cultural moments where people just put differences aside and feel something collectively. And brands know this. That's why Nike, Adidas, Red Bull, Puma, Under Armour all live in sport. It's not just about performance gear, it's about identity. When Serena Williams stepped onto the court, she wasn't just an athlete. She was culture. And when Messi lifted that trophy, it wasn't just a football story. It was Adidas embedding itself into history. Now, athletes today are bigger than institutions. Look at LeBron James. Look at Ronaldo. Look at Naomi Osaka. They're not just players. They're cultural leaders. And their partnerships with brands aren't just endorsements. They're storytelling engines. And this is why sport is such a powerful cultural lever. It delivers shared emotion of a global scale. That's something ads will never ever replicate. And it's the same principle I saw back at Disney. The magic wasn't the castle. The magic was shared memory, and sports does exactly the same thing. So let's zoom out, because sport shows us culture in motion, art shows us culture crystallized. Taking a small break from this video to talk to you about the Unmatched Collective. It's my private community for founders, brand leaders, and creators who want to build unmatched brands, not just for quick wins, but for the long term. Inside, I share the frameworks I've learned over my 20 years career at brands like Puma, Disney, and Warner Bros., and through building my own company. We dive into real case studies, live sessions, and the kind of founder-to-founder conversations you can't get on social media. So if you're serious about building a brand that lasts with clarity, purpose, and the right mindset, the link is below. Now let's get back to the video. So one of my favorite brand stories is Moncler. When Ruffini bought it, it was basically a ski brand. Now think jackets for the slopes. Useful, but a little bit boring. So instead of just doubling down on technical performance, he asked, how do we make this cultural? And his answer was Moncler Genius, collaborations with artists, designers, and musicians. Now, suddenly, the jacket wasn't just functional, it was a symbol. And Moncler moved from niche to icon. Now, you see this across the board. Louis Vuitton with Takashi Murakami, Nike with Off-White, even Apple with their launches. Those aren't just product demos, they're cultural performances. And so art gives inspiration, but commerce gives scale. And together, you get culture. And here's the secret though. Art doesn't have to mean fine art. It's anything, everything that elevates your product into cultural expression. When Skims worked with Fendi, that was art meeting commerce. And when Lego collaborates with Adidas, the same thing happens. Now, the brands that understand this stop competing on features. They compete on cultural capital. But even when you attach to art, nostalgia, or sport, you can't afford to become predictable. And that's where the last ingredient comes in. Taking a break to scratch my nose. Cutting the nose off. Okay. So here's the truth. Most brand collaborations are boring. I've said it. Someone had to. So two logos slapped together. Nothing changes. Nobody fucking remembers. But the great ones are different. They force culture to stop and pay attention. Think about Nike and Tiffany, Crocs and Balenciaga, Supreme and Louis Vuitton. None of those made sense on paper. And that's why they worked. Remember this, predictability kills relevance. The moment your audience can anticipate your next move, you're lost. But here's the nuance. Surprise isn't chaos. You can't just throw random partnerships together. The surprise still has to sit inside your brand universe. Think of it like jazz. You improvise, but you still stay in key. So the real playbook for surprise is 1. Break your own pattern. 2. Collaborate outside of your category. And 3, do it fast enough that you beat the copycats. And that's how you stay culturally alive at scale. And that takes us full circle. Because culture, nostalgia, sport, art, and surprise are not separate plays. They're all part of the same system. So let's tie this together. Culture is the only hack you have left. Nostalgia beats futurism in uncertain times. Sport is one of the last true global unifiers. And art art plus commerce creates icons. Surprise is the ultimate moat. And the brands that understand this don't just capture attention, they earn love, and love is the only thing in branding that actually compounds. So here's my advice if you're building a brand in 2025 and beyond. Stop asking, what's the ad campaign? That's old school. Stop it. I'm saying it again. Stop it. Start asking, what's the cultural moment? Stop asking, how do we outspend? I don't even understand that question. Start asking, how do we plug into what people already care about? Because ads fade, algorithms change, but culture is what you build with, not against it. Culture actually scales. And if you want a brand that lasts decades, that's where you need to actually start.